Hello everyone, and welcome to week 7. We are now at the halfway point of this course and in this semester. And you may notice this week that I'm using a different application than Loom. I have a free version of Loom which allows me 5 minutes. And based on doing a quick overview of this week's module, I recognize that there are some aspects of what is provided to you in this module that, for example, aren't up to date and may make it, again, may present some barriers and make it potentially where you could be unsuccessful in this week's task. And so I wanted to put this video together. Hopefully I won't be too long-winded, just to walk you through this week's assignments a little bit more in detail so that you are successful with this week's task. So let's just jump right into it. As you can see, this is now kind of that halfway point. We're at the midterm. So you are applying everything that you've learned thus far to creating a individual lesson plan. And so this week you're going to do part 1 and part 2. And then next week we'll do part 3, and I'll focus on part 3 more next week. But essentially part 1 and part 2 are creating learning goals, and that's in part 1. And then in part 2, you're going to be designing assessments aligned to those learning goals. Now, before you jump into doing that lesson plan, we are going to ask you to provide some accommodations for specific students for the lesson plan that you're designing. And so the beginning of the week, you're going to do just a quick assignment to get to know and understand the concept of accommodations, and in providing accommodations for those specific students in your lesson plan. And then come midweek, you're going to start part 1. And so as you jump into the part 1 portal, this video has been provided to you to provide instructions, but as you go through this video, to be honest, you're going to notice that some of the template and some of the conversation looks different, it's formatted a bit different, and I just didn't want you to be confused because the template that is now provided to you is different than the one in the video. And so I wanted to make sure that I just walked you myself through the template and kind of this module page, assignment page, so that you're familiar with what it is that you need to be doing. So let's go ahead and do that. So as you can see, midterm lesson plan part 1, here's the template. You can see you're going to be picking content standards, developing learning targets and objectives and essential questions, all things you've done before in this prior semester, or the first half of the semester. So what they're going to ask you to do, or what we're asking you to do, is you are going to actually break down a content standard that we provide you. Now this is why the midterm is a little bit different than the final. In the midterm, we're going to provide you the standard, whereas in the final, you're going to select the standard. And so it'll be a whole different lesson plan at the end of the semester when you do this again. But this is just a midterm to see if you can essentially apply what you've learned. And so we're going to give you the standard, where you may wonder, where is that standard? It's right here. So you click kind of midterm content standards, it pulls down, and you pick the grade level, the content area that specifically aligns to you. So for example, if you are a 9th grade English teacher, you'd pick the 9th grade English teacher standard or content standard and so forth. So hopefully that helps. So you go ahead and put that in there, and then you're going to do what you've done already this semester and unpack that standard. Tell me what the concepts are, the skills are embedded within that standard. After that, you need to concentrate on what key vocabulary will need to be taught, which academic vocabulary is so essential to learning content for students. And so some of those words will obviously be explicitly outlined in the standard, and some of them will be implied. And we're going to trust that you're kind of a content expert, and you're going to recognize if I was teaching this a lesson and if I was unpacking this standard, yes, there are some key words here. For example, the English one, figurative language, but what other specific types of figurative language might my students need to know, and you might want to outline those in the key vocabulary section. Then when you get to D, this is why another reason why I wanted to make this video, is that you're going to unpack now, all the unpacking that you've done, you're going to develop either 1 or 2 learning goals that you think appropriately align to the standard. And obviously, let us know what level of Bloom's taxonomy it is and Webb's depth of knowledge. But the challenge is when you go back over here to the midterm and you look at the rubric and you want to shoot for being a distinguished teacher, you notice down here that it says that your outcomes have to be differentiated for diverse learners. Well, if we go back up, you can start to see that these diverse learners are right here. So when you click one of these links, I'll just click the secondary major one, you're going to see that we've given you a class profile for some different students, or at least we're going to give you a variety of student profiles. Now, if the lesson objective that you designed for your entire class seems developmentally inappropriate for any of these individual students, then I would recommend that you include a modified or an accommodation and include a differentiated learning outcome for that particular student. So you want to go ahead and put that in here too. And this doesn't clearly say that, but the rubric does. And so that's why I wanted to make that clear. And then, as you've done prior, right, develop essential questions, kind of talk about how you would introduce those questions and use those questions and learning goals throughout the lesson. And then, of course, you want to make sure that you're facilitating higher level thinking, and you might want to design some questions related to that, which, again, we give you resources for. I'm going to minimize this over here, right? So you have Bloom's taxonomy, Web's depth of knowledge, example of questions. And then when we get to the rubric, you'll see one of the first things of being a distinguished teacher is not just that you've had outcomes aligned to the state standards, but that those aligned standards represent high levels of rigor. So you want to make sure that your objective is at the higher level of thinking. So with that, let's go through this rubric so I can kind of define for you what it is I'll be looking for, right? So again, I've explained that one, but the lesson objectives are clear, they're measurable, they're specific, things we've already talked about in this course, so you can refer back to those modules. So I'm looking for objectives that aren't too fuzzy, like I wouldn't have a question about what it is that I would be learning if I was your student, and that they are specific and clear in all of the things we've talked about in the prior module. They relate to the big ideas of the discipline, which again to me is more just they relate to the standard, and that I can see that you have sufficient content knowledge. We call it, just content knowledge. We have a word for it in the field I won't worry about. That these ideas that you're developing, they represent a range of different types of factual knowledge, conceptual, reasoning, social interactions, management. All of those pieces are all within those essential questions. And so I really would like to see with your higher order thinking and your essential questions that you are really robustly developing learning targets and objectives that align to the robustness or at least the broad scale of the standard. And then again, as I explained before, I'm looking to see that if necessary, that you've differentiated your outcomes. And I know the profiles, and if I see, this lesson may be too developmentally inappropriate for a specific student, I'll encourage you to reconsider writing those objectives. Okay, so once you're done with part one, as you can see, it's a bit extensive, you're gonna jump into part two, and part two is now about planning assessments. Now you'll notice this week we do have another Zoom collaborative, but I want you to use this Zoom collaborative while yes, there is a thinking task and there's a template we're giving you to understand higher level thinking tasks, but the assessment will specifically ask you to develop higher level thinking tasks. And clearly, as you saw in part one, you need to develop higher level thinking questions. And so use your Zoom group, collaborate with them, talk about some different ideas that you have before you go into your lesson plan, so that you can share and kind of, share, collaborate, get ideas from one another. That's the purpose of a PLC. So that would be kind of your Zoom task for the week. Now, when you jump into midterm lesson part two, again, we're talking about assessments now. And so you'll have all of the things you need to support you with developing the assessment. And so let's go through this template really quickly. So you are areas that are marked in red. That means you need to use some kind of a Google application to develop something that you're going to submit. And so you can see right off the bat, you're going to develop a formative assessment that is aligned to the learning goal that you created in part one. And so you would go ahead and include that formative assessment here. Again, this is not a formative assessment you've already created. You've done this before. You've done this in a prior module. Now you're creating a new one aligned to the new kind of standard objective you just created in part one of your midterm. Then here's the part where you're going to add those accommodations specifically. So think about those students that you had and what adaptations are you going to have to provide for them in the particular assessment you designed based on what you know about those students. And you will include that for each of those students, just as it's modeled for you here. And then you'll provide a success criteria. Now this was always a little bit misleading to me because it looks as if here you need to provide a quantitative success criteria. You don't have to. If your formative assessment kind of lends itself to have more of a qualitative assessment criteria, I would go with that. And then down here it says, what would your assess criteria look like for this assessment? Obviously you're giving me a link of that criteria. This seems pretty redundant, so I'm going to be honest. If I see this here, I don't necessarily need to see it twice here. So I'm okay if you just submit it here and move forward. Now, the deeper level thinking task or assessment is we want to also make sure that the assessment you're providing is at a higher level of thinking. And so you want to include all of those things here and provide assessment accommodations. So again, you're providing the link to that task. You're describing how it's at a deeper level. You're providing accommodations. and you're providing the success criteria. Now, I will also say, if your formative assessment is already at a higher level, don't repeat the work, right? So essentially just link it again, or you wouldn't even have to link it again. You could put a little note to me that, I'm using the same assessment, but then describe why you believe it's at a deeper level. And then if there needs to be additional accommodations that you didn't describe because it's at a higher level, explain those. Again, I'm trying really hard based on your feedback to not give you too much busy work. So that is part 2. So let's go ahead and go back. I want to go through the rubric, and that'll be kind of my final piece here. So what am I looking for in part 2? So all learning outcomes have specific appropriate criteria. So it's not just that you're giving an assessment, that you're giving an assessment that's clear on what you're looking for in that assessment, that your assessment criteria is clearly written. Plans include formative assessments and adjustments based on student needs. This is a little bit confusing here. Possible adjustments based on prior existing assessment data. That will actually happen later on in the final. So this rubric doesn't change, but really it's just the formative assessments are adjusted according to your students' needs. As you can see here, plans are clearly indicate accommodations, modifications based on students' needs. So those are the kind of things I'm looking for. They're just clear, they're aligned, and there are necessary accommodations. That would put you distinguished for the assessment part. So with that said, that is the week at glance. You can see it's, again, lighter than prior weeks, but there's a lot more depth to what you're doing. So if you have any questions, comments, concerns, please reach out to myself or Sister Reeves. Please know that I check my emails at least once every 24 hours, but if you need a quicker response, if you're just, I can't move on and my time is short and I really can use some feedback in this moment and you're not getting that feedback from your PLC, just call me. I believe if you look at my profile, you will see my cell phone number. Call me, text me. Hey, Brother Riddle, do you have a second? Can we talk about this? I'd love to help. So other than that, I bid you adieu. Have a great week. And I look forward to seeing what you create.